So what I would like to introduce is a part of the larger context of what Go Local is and what we're doing and what our mission is to flip value definitions to make a healthier economy. And what I mean by values is I'm going to focus, and this is some of the early work was done by James Hillman on this, if you guys are familiar with him, psychologist. I'm going to take the words and the ideas represented behind these words of efficiency, growth, service, and maintenance. And we've essentially walked the American dream out to the end of the pier. And we're going to look at how what the American dream represented in terms of the materialism of that and the narrowness of definitions around these words, efficiency, growth, service, and maintenance, kind of got us into the pickle that we're in now. And that the answer to this is not to go to the opposite of these things, like inefficiency is not better than efficiency, and no growth is not better than growth, and no service is, you get the point of how could we redefine or expand these definitions to not be in opposition to the status quo, but to modify it through some new principles and some new ideas about how to work that. So the first part of this is, I think this is from Eric Hoffer, this quote, "You can never have enough of what you don't need." But it sure is fun getting it all. And if you guys are like big fans of any of the 50s stuff or even Mad Men, anybody big Mad Men fans here, the 50s and 60s and this focus on consumption, right, on just acquiring more things. And it was great because the standard of living was really picking up, and we were coming out of the post-Depression 30s and a post-war 40s, and it was time to unleash all of this after 2 decades of complete sacrifice to have all this hedonism, it was like great to acquire all this stuff and you have the money to do it. There we go. And so what we want to do is look at the shadow side of materialism is how I want to refer to this, is that materialism in and of itself is not a negative or bad thing, but there's a shadow side of it that can have these unintended consequences. And so we're going to look at that first and how it relates to those 4 terms, and then move into other ways of doing it so we can see what the bright ideas might be. And first I'm going to start with a video. I love this video. I don't know if you can read that or not. Dale Gribble, I put Dale's Gribble. Are you guys familiar? Are you big King of the Hill fans? Dale Gribble, the smoking character on that show. Anyway, he's complaining that the tobacco companies are ruthless. They kill 300,000 of their best customers every year. This video is sort of symbolic of what was happening in the early 50s, and just to kind of give you some indication of how far that we've come.
Are you out of bed in the middle of the night? Well, if you were a doctor, it would be often. And generally, there isn't much time to spare.
Coffee, doctor?
Oh, fine. Have a candle with your coffee. Thanks. This night work's kind of rough, isn't it? That's right. But a camel's always a pleasure.
Yes, folks, the pleasing mildness of a camel is just as enjoyable to a doctor as it is to you or me. In a nationwide survey, doctors in all branches of medicine were asked what were included. And according to this nationwide survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Try Camels yourself, the cigarette so many doctors enjoy.
The thing that I played this commercial for a conference of economic development specialists in Canada a couple of years ago as a way to kind of say, we look at the medical profession and we have such reverence for, their medical science progress and everything, but this was in 1952. Okay, so within 60 years, you had for almost up until the late 50s, but starting in the 1930s, the medical profession shilling for the tobacco companies, encouraging, and this was in spite of the fact that we had all this evidence that it was not very healthy for you, even at that time. So the idea is to say, in the the continuum of history, it's been a very short time since we've made the transition from that. But this sort of marked that point of kind of what was happening in the 50s going into the 60s. Okay, so efficiency. The definition that has sort of set all this in motion that kind of started at that time is that the just do it, the cost efficiency for the sake of profit. So the definition of efficiency, the first part of this narrowness was breaking efficiency apart from the purposes that it used to serve, and now it was only serving the concept of profit. And we see that just recently, within this week, Red Lobster had been cutting staff, so corporations cutting jobs left and right, everybody kind of cutting for the sake of efficiency. And they had demoted the waiters. You can read this if you're a fast reader. But the employee saying, you know, we're going to be completely worn out. It's definitely going to hurt service. But for the purpose of the efficiency, grinding this down in that way just to get more profits, even though it's actually hurting the business. And growth, bigger and more is better, is the motto of the. And for service, the customer is always right as long as you just keep them consuming. And service designed on the production model, meaning we've thought of service very one-dimensionally or two-dimensionally as just as it would be if you were designing production, right? Where the consumer has to keep consuming more in order to meet the demands of a manufacturing cycle. And the other part of that is that they think of productivity in those same terms when they're trying to define what you're doing as an employee. And maintenance, dispose of instead of maintain. We don't take care of things, we just throw them away and get new ones to replace them. Planned obsolescence. And let's go back to efficiency and say, now efficiency must be connected to a purpose for the sake of, and so triple bottom line instead of just bottom line all of a sudden creates and expands the purpose, right? The profits are very necessary. I mean, most arguments that you'll get from folks that are very traditional business minds or economics will say, well, you got to have profits. Well, of course you do. You definitely have to have profits, but they have to be balanced in with something else, because when you elevate that to this higher, as a higher principle, then we get stuck in a lot of the things that we're doing now, right? And so just to ask the question for businesses, for economic policy planners, why do you do what you do? That's what efficiency has to answer. And with growth is that it was sort of an immature notion of just acquiring things, that was somehow or another going to just increasing standard of living by getting more things was going to be important. And by, instead of going to no growth, to actually go to talk about growth is deepening, intensification, shedding, repetition, and emptying. And we don't have time to go into all of these concepts, and I'd be glad to share James Hillman's work with you around those. But it's defining growth in much different ways rather than just getting bigger or getting more of something. Service, that putting quality in service that transcends a person. Instead of thinking that better quality service, if you look at programs that do that now, where you got a concierge in a hotel on every floor, where you've got all this personal treatment, but it's still in that customer service sort of thing, and we need to expand service to mean something more than that and beyond just people, meaning that it's serving more than that. That it's a world service, that everything in nature, everything in world, this is all part of that Gaia principle, as well as that we're in service to the world, not just to a person or serving a particular thing, but you have to have this holistic perspective of what we're in service for. And on maintenance, you notice how the words that we use for maintenance sometimes of all kind of around from this root of upkeep, meaning elevating it up. The stuff we all hate to do, cleaning up our rooms, doing all this kind of maintenance stuff, but it's actually part of the hands-on, part of the therapeutic work of that, and we can raise it to the level of production, of keeping things in good working order. Management, most of what we do in management, I know as a manager and having done a lot of organizational development work, most of management is maintenance. It's not the heroic leader that's coming up with these incredible innovative ideas and, you know, putting the flag in the ground. It's the grind work day in and day out that makes it really work, and that's called maintenance. So how do we redefine the American dream, and how do we transform it from standard of living to quality of life? That quality of life is really kind of what we're striving for, instead of just standard of living and making more and acquiring more, that really happiness is the goal, and quality of life is a way to help us define that. So take responsibility. This is the first key, is that we have to take responsibility for creating that happiness if we want it. And some of the things that we can do, so this is what Go Local works on. The first thing is a healthy local economy. So we have a huge body of work about how to produce a healthy local economy, how to build our local wealth assets. This is incredibly important, these 3 points. So the healthy local economy has the local wealth assets, as well as local decision making. So these are the 3 parts. You have the assets, you have to have the networks, you have to start creating your own jobs, you have to essentially become local self-reliance. So this is part of what our work is right now, is to establish this, and we do that through these things. And so we look at a supply chain in the county, for example. So our economic policy development work, a lot of it, most of it is in this area of inputs and production and working with, particularly within the local food system. So I don't know if any of you caught the presentation they were doing on the food system. We've been working with that group doing the action planning for the economic vitality. So we do a lot of work in this area, getting local capital, power and energy supplies, local food production, that sort of thing. And then in marketing, so we have the rewards card that we use, if any of you have ever used that. It's a way of connecting people that you get a little something back, but it's also, it's a way to tangibly and physically connect with the businesses and to get a little bit of savings too. And then mostly we work with, on the marketing side, in all these different categories. I represented a few of them here. But basically the buy local, eat local, bank local, choosing local first. So this is just really, it's not an overnight thing at all. The main thing I wanted to show, or at least the main point I was trying to make with this, is that starting in the 50s is when we started really making the shift into this other thing of materialism, but it's sort of petered out. I mean, if you start looking at standard of living calculations and comparisons, and wages and this sort of thing, it's not only bottomed out, it's kind of reversing out at this point. And so that 60-year cycle has kind of done like this, and it's starting to level out. Well, we've got to replace it with something. And rather than think of it as a huge revolution to just throw the baby out with the bathwater, it's how do we salvage what is there right now, so that it doesn't put us in opposition, because you know how this works. You know, there's always a status quo that has interest in the way things are, even if it's dying. You know, you think it's irrational, but it's not. I mean, people will defend things that aren't working when they're not working, even if the evidence is right there in front of them, because it's what they know, it's what they do. And so we see that a lot when we work, particularly within political circles and that sort of thing, is that there's a lot of opposition. So rather than going in opposing to it, it's helped them redefine it as well, so that they're willing to transform it. And so that's the work that we do, and that's the presentation, and thank you for your patience. And if you have any questions or comments or anything, I'm happy for that.